to the 60th anniversary celebration of the WSU Honors College. My name is Malea Loukides, and we are delighted to have you join us today for a presentation with Honors alumna Leslie Rowe. The title of Leslie's presentation this afternoon is American Ambassador, Mission and Misconceptions. Before we begin today's presentation, we want to first acknowledge that WSU's locations statewide are on the homelands of Native peoples. Washington State University and the Honors College express its deepest respect for and gratitude to these original caretakers of the region. We would like to also take a moment to acknowledge that while this is a joyous day for us in the WSU Honors College, we recognize that today is the 19th anniversary of the tragedy of September 11th and a day of deep emotional reflection in America. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Malea Loukides, and I'm a student in the WSU Honors College, double majoring in philosophy and political science. After I graduate, I plan to attend law school with hopes of one day becoming a civil liberties attorney. And now it is my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Ambassador Leslie Rowe. During her career as a Foreign Service officer, she served in Brazil, Costa Rica, Portugal, Thailand, Kenya, Mozambique, Papua New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, and Washington, D.C. As ambassador to Mozambique, Leslie represented the U.S. on issues relating to democracy and anti-corruption, regional security, global health, food security, women's issues, and the promotion of bilateral and regional trade. She led the President's Emergency Fund for AIDS Relief and the President's Malaria Initiative, overseeing the activities of USAID, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Peace Corps, the State Department, and the Department of Defense. In her last post, Leslie was the Secretary of State's Special Envoy for Global Health Diplomacy and set up the new Office of Global Health Diplomacy at the State Department. She led her team to support ambassadors and the U.S. Embassy staffs to advance U.S. global health goals and control the spread of pandemics. Leslie received her undergraduate degree from Washington State University, an MA from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, and her master's in education from Northeastern University. She studied at the Sorbonne in Paris, France, and was a Fulbright scholar in Germany. Prior to joining the Foreign Service, Leslie was a director of the International Office at Tufts University. If at any time during the presentation you have questions for Leslie, please submit them through the YouTube channel box on your right. We will do our best to answer all the questions at the end of the presentation. And now, please join me in giving a warm Cougar welcome to Leslie Rowe.
Well, thank you so much, Malea, for that very nice introduction. And I also want to thank Linda Infranco and Dean Grant Norton for inviting me to participate in the 60th anniversary. It means a lot, even though I'm far away in Cape Cod, that I can do this virtually. And also congratulations to all of you on the 60th anniversary of the Honors College. It's been quite a history, and I'm really pleased to see that it's thriving so much. So I wanted to share with you a little bit today about what an ambassador is, because I think a lot of people think that we all wear pinstripe suits and we hobnob at diplomatic receptions, that you have to be very wealthy to be an ambassador, and you have to be male, pale, and Yale, which you can see I am not. And so I wanted to maybe get rid of some of those misconceptions and also just give you an idea of what the mission and the role of an ambassador is abroad. It's true that we do often have to go to diplomatic receptions, but they're not just fun and games. We are actually working when we do those. I'm going to be talking today about what we call career ambassadors, like me, who took the Foreign Service examinations and then went up the ladder in the State Department and eventually were fortunate enough to be an ambassador. There's another kind of ambassador, which you probably read about in the papers. The president has the privilege of appointing people who are not diplomats to be ambassadors, people who have made a donation to their political party or serve their political party. So we do have political ambassadors as well as career ambassadors, but I'll be focusing on the traditional career ambassador today. So what is an ambassador, and what do we do? Diplomats in general, all Foreign Service officers, are representatives of the United States abroad. We represent the government, US government, the president, but we also represent the culture and values and traditions of the United States. And the ambassador is just is the highest representative of the appointed by the president. So the ambassador is a leader and a manager, and our basic functions are negotiating, reporting, and representing the United States. Maybe we can have the first slide. Malea. This is a picture of one of my posts. This is the US consulate in Recife, Brazil. And I was fortunate enough to have this job in my third post. Next slide, Malea. Here's a picture of me in my office. As you can see, those were the days when we didn't have cell phones, but we still managed to get our work done. I particularly like this picture because of the background of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And what did I do in Recife? I think you all know a bit about Brazil. I was in Northeast Brazil, where we have an embassy in Brasilia, but we also have consulates, and they are like satellite posts. So this was a relatively small consulate at the time. We have about 30 people working there, both American and Brazilian. And we covered a wide variety of reporting and representing the US, hosting receptions, the 4th of July. I traveled extensively through 7 states in the Northeast of Brazil, reporting on political issues, economic issues, social and human rights. We set up an American Chamber of Commerce while I was there. So we had a variety of activities. Next slide, Malea. I'm sharing these images with you so you get a sense of what we're actually doing in the field. Now I moved quite a few years ahead to Kenya, and I was the deputy chief of mission at the embassy in Nairobi. These are 2 of our Peace Corps volunteers. The deputy ambassador is the number 2. So I was the deputy to the ambassador. And when he would leave post, then I was in charge. Nairobi is a very, very big embassy. We have 18 different US government agencies that are represented there, from the Centers for Disease Control to USAID, the Department of Defense, many other agencies that work there. And we were in charge of managing all of those posts, all those different agencies. That's a big job of the manager, of the ambassador. It's not just the Department of State at the embassy, but as I mentioned, many, many different other agencies. And we have to make sure that they're on track, carrying out the US goals for the country. And it's a big management job as well. These are 2 of our Peace Corps volunteers. I tried to get out in the field a lot. This is Kevin and Megan, and they were Peace Corps volunteers in Eastern Kenya. They were involved in a very interesting program for the first program for deaf volunteers in the world. Megan on the right is deaf, and Kevin on the left is hearing, but he grew up in a family with whose both parents were deaf. And they launched this program working with students in deaf schools, or deaf students in schools, and also teaching them a lot about HIV and AIDS, which was a very big problem, still is in Kenya. And we had a very, very large program on assisting the Kenyans in combating HIV and AIDS. Next slide. This is Kevin. You can see he's wearing a traditional Kenyan costume, and he's with his students at the school. All of them are deaf. So he had quite a challenge trying to teach them elementary school and just basics, but communicating through sign language. Next slide. This is a close-up of some of the students. Beautiful kids. So we're going to move to the next slide. In addition to Peace Corps, I mentioned the Department of Defense was in Nairobi. And in this particular slide, we flew out to a rather remote area of Kenya, in northern Kenya, right on the Somali border. The next slide. We went to a town that did not have a girls' high school, and the Department of Defense, is one of their 8 programs, built a school for girls. They were, of course, separated. This is an area that's heavily Muslim, so the boys and girls were separated, and there was no school for the girls. Next slide. So you can see I'm cutting the ribbon, opening up the new school. Next slide. And this major standing in the background, she attended the program as well. So the Department of Defense did a major job, a really wonderful job in building the school, and you can see the plaque dedicating the school. Next slide. These are the seniors, and you can see they're all wearing the abaya, and all the seniors wore black. They put on a very extensive program for us as part of the ceremony. Next slide. These are the juniors being led in song. Next slide. And these are the younger students. Actually, these are more at the elementary level, so you can see the boys and the girls were still together. Next slide. One of the things that they put on, there was opposition particularly in the men in the village, to having a school for girls. And finally they gave in and we were able to build a school. But in this little skit, the girls were putting on a play, basically, trying to convince their fathers that it was okay for girls to go to school. It was quite humorous. You can see the fellow on the left, I think, is one of the fathers. Next slide. And of course, whenever you go out to these ceremonies, you've got to give a speech. Kenya is a former British colony, so they have 2 national languages, English and Swahili. I studied a little bit of Swahili, but English was really the major language in Kenya. Next slide. And of course, at most of these ceremonies, we had to plant a tree. So that's starting the process of planting the tree. Next slide. Now we're shifting to Papua New Guinea. After I was the deputy ambassador, I was fortunate enough to be appointed by President George W. Bush to be the ambassador to Papua New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, and Vanuatu, 3 island nations in the Pacific. Papua New Guinea, where I was based, capital is Port Moresby, is just north of Australia. If you look at a map, it's actually it's a very big island. It's the 2nd biggest island in the world after Greenland. Has about 6 million people, 856 tribes, and they speak 1,000 different languages. I was really glad to hear the acknowledgement of Native Americans in Malea's introduction. And it was fascinating to see a country which is basically still run by the indigenous people. 97% of the land in Papua New Guinea is owned by Native people. When I presented my credentials, I delivered letters from President George W. Bush to the president of Papua New Guinea. And as part of the ceremony, I had to review the troops. Next slide. I mentioned 856 different tribes in Papua New Guinea. This is one of them, one of my favorites, actually, the Huli Wigmen. Very colorful and very interesting tribe in the highlands. Next slide. And of course, opening ceremony. You will see in the background, and I think we'll go to the next slide as well, the 9 Mile Urban Clinic. This was, again, an HIV/AIDS program. It was just becoming a big problem in Papua New Guinea. And AID was funding a program to counsel people on getting tested and getting medication for those that tested positive. So we visited this urban clinic. You can see the line out the door, very popular clinic. Next slide. And of course, as part of that ceremony, I presented some certificates for people who, these were for medical practitioners. They had done training in HIV and AIDS. To our left is the head of our HIV and AIDS program, who was an AID employee. Next slide. And this is one of my favorite activities that I got to do as an ambassador. We have what's called the International Women of Courage Award that the Secretary of State awards every year. And all ambassadors nominate a woman from their country who we think has shown exceptional courage. This was Helen, and Helen was a student who contracted HIV and AIDS from her boyfriend. And at the time that she got it, it was pretty much a death sentence, but she managed to get medication, and she became a very active person in helping other people get tested and counseled and get medication. So she was really a wonderful woman and showed a lot of courage, a lot of stigma about HIV and AIDS at the time. And she actually did a television program 5 minutes every night after the news talking about her experience. So she was quite courageous because she could have been excluded from society because of the stigma. Next slide. Another tribe, these are called the Mudmen, and they're up in the highlands of Papua New Guinea. Next slide. And here I was making friends with a couple of them. There's another tribe represented. The fellow in the back is a different tribe, and he's from one of the other highland towns, but they came out to give me a welcome. Next slide. I think you may, during the pandemic of COVID-19, you may have seen on television the hospital ship, the Mercy, and which provided assistance to people down in the Southern California area. Well, the Mercy is actually usually in the Pacific, and they came every year to Papua New Guinea, and they would spend 2 weeks in port, and they would service about 25,000 people, doing all kinds of operations, removing cleft palates, dentistry, everything you can think of. They do amazing work, and they had all military forces represented, Air Force, Army, Navy, and a number of civilians with non-governmental organizations also helping. They just do tremendous work, and I was really glad to see that they came back to the United States to help us out with the pandemic. Next slide. Another ceremony, more tribes, as you can see. Next slide. And now we moved over to the Solomon Islands, which I'm sorry, this is a Vanuatu, which is a very important island during World War II. If you ever saw the movie or the play South Pacific, it was set in Vanuatu. There's still a lot of memorabilia from World War II left over. We were a very big presence there. Next slide. And environmental affairs were also quite important at the mission. That was one of our priorities. And I visited another Peace Corps volunteer, and as part of his environmental project, we were releasing these hatchback turtles into the wild. They were marked and they could be tracked. So doing preservation of these turtles. Next slide. And that's the village that we visited. The Peace Corps volunteer, John, you can just barely see on the right of the screen. He's down kneeling with some of the other villagers. And the Peace Corps director is on the far left. You can see we actually had to take a boat out to this island where the village was located. Next slide. And now we moved over to the Solomon Islands. I was accredited to 3 different countries. We only had the embassy in Papua New Guinea, but I would fly often to the other islands to do reporting and see, what was how our programs were being managed there. This fellow the Solomon Islands is the home of Guadalcanal, one of the biggest battles in World War II. And every year we celebrated Guadalcanal Day on August 7th. And we had, for many years, we had many, many American veterans coming to, who had served in the Solomon Islands and were coming back for a reunion. We don't have as many now, of course, as many have passed on, but it was really a privilege for me to meet so many of them. Next slide. Now, I mentioned that we do several things as ambassadors: negotiating, reporting, representing the United States. And here we are in the negotiating role. In this particular treaty that we were negotiating, the fellow on the left is the Brazilian ambassador. And in the middle, you have the Mozambican foreign minister and me. And we negotiated a kind of an unusual treaty, an agreement, trilateral between the United States, Brazil, and Mozambique to provide food assistance and also health assistance. And it was a wonderful cooperative effort. We all brought something to the table. Mozambique, of course, was a Portuguese colony. So the Brazilians are there, and they were offering Portuguese-speaking employees who could help out with the projects, as well as funding. We did the most of the funding of the projects. Next slide. And here we are, exchanging copies. We all had to sign, the three of them. In the background, you can see our USAID director, the tall fellow. And on the right is our Centers for Disease Control director in Mozambique. Next slide. And of course, we had to have a toast. The picture in the background was the then president of Papua New Guinea, President Gebuza. Next slide. I didn't really tell you too much about Mozambique. I think most of you know it's in East Africa. It's actually south of Kenya, and it borders South Africa. It was a Portuguese colony. It's still a very poor country. They had a very long civil war after independence that went on for 19 years, and they're still recovering from that war. This is another International Woman of Courage Award. Maria in the middle, who's receiving the award. She was a human rights activist, and she's with her family. It's her mother on the right and her daughters, who also came to the ceremony. We had a big reception at our residence and invited hundreds of people to come to honor her for her activity in human rights. Next slide. Another Peace Corps picture. One of the things that I got to do, which I really loved, was that I got to swear in the new group of Peace Corps volunteers. We had several groups that would come in during a year, and you can see the Mozambican dancers that performed at the ceremony, and all the different Peace Corps volunteers from many, many states in the US. It's always a lot of fun to do that. That's the Peace Corps director just to my left. Next slide. Now we're up in the highlands of Mozambique in a city called Nampula. And these lovely ladies are a group of volunteers. We paid them small stipends, 90 of them, at a hospital up in Nampula. They were all HIV positive and were on medication. And we found that the best people to counsel and test people who wanted to know if they were HIV positive or not were people who were already HIV positive, because they were on the medication. You can see they look very healthy, and they could talk to people who were afraid to get tested, afraid to know if they had HIV or not, because they were great examples of the fact that you can live with the disease. The next slide. One thing that I always did was try to meet with a small group. One of my big responsibilities was managing our assistance programs. And The American taxpayer pays a lot of money for assistance programs abroad, so it's very important for us to check to make sure the programs are efficient and effective. And so I met with a group of the counselors, and just to hear what they had to say, was our assistance being effective? And luckily they were very positive. So, but that's one thing I needed to do when I would go out in the field, which I did a lot of. You represent not only in the capital of the United States, but I tried to travel as much as I could so that I could really see what was going on all over the country. Next slide. Mozambicans love to dance, and you can see that they gave me a lovely Mozambican costume to wear too, and drew me into the dancing during our ceremony. Next slide. Another picture of them. Next slide. This is on that same trip. I went out to visit one of our agricultural projects. This is a small farmer. He had lost, there was a blight on coconut trees in Mozambique, and he lost everything. So one of our agencies set up a program to help farmers move into a different area of production and diversify their skills. So we're out in the field. I'm standing with one of the USAID representatives as well as the farmer. Next slide. And one of the nice things that you get to do as an ambassador is occasionally the president comes to town. And in this case, it was former President Bill Clinton who came to Papua New Guinea, and he met with the embassy staff. You can see the staff in the background. Next slide. This is President George W. Bush, who I mentioned appointed me to be president or ambassador to Papua New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, and Vanuatu. And after I went to Africa, to Mozambique, I attended a conference in Tanzania with President George W. Bush. Got to sit next to him at a breakfast program, and that's Mrs. Bush, Laura Bush, to his right. The fellow on the left was the ambassador to Tanzania at the time where the conference was being held. And he recently resigned as the head of the U.S. Agency for International Development. Next slide. And this picture actually of President Obama was taken at the White House before I went to Mozambique. Next slide. Now, I wanted to show you a couple of pictures of how ambassadors have to work these days. And this fellow, Ambassador Dennis Hankins, he and I worked together when I was posted at the U.S. Embassy in Lisbon, Portugal. And years later, and he became the ambassador to Mali. He's currently the ambassador to Mali. And in this particular picture, we are assisting Mali, and he was signing an agreement to give assistance on COVID-19. And as you can see, both the president of Mali and Ambassador Hankins, they are wearing masks, so as well as the people in the background. So it was lovely. It's always nice to see your colleagues also become ambassadors later on. And one more slide, I think. This is another a colleague that I worked with at the embassy in Kenya. Ambassador, she's now Ambassador Lisa Peterson. She is ambassador to Eswatini. You may not know Eswatini. It used to be called Swaziland, but a couple of years ago, the name was changed to a more indigenous name. She's still in Eswatini, which is, by the way, right between Mozambique and South Africa. Very small country, lovely country. And also in mask, and also this was an assistance ceremony for COVID-19. So they couldn't shake hands, but I guess they did the elbow thing. And I think that may end the slides. So Malea, I think I'm completed the program of slides.
Yep, that's the end of the presentation. We got a few questions for you. So the first one is, what advice would you give students who are considering a career in foreign service, and how should they prepare now to be successful in the future?
I think the first thing that I would advise is if you're not fluent in another language, another foreign language, uh, concentrate on really learning another language. And if at all possible, try and get some experience living abroad. So you can kill two birds with one stone there. You can go and study a foreign language in another country. You'll really become fluent. I was fortunate enough when I was at WSU to get a full scholarship to go to Paris to study French. And I also majored in Spanish as well. That's very key. It's not just that you have fluency in the language, but when you learn a language, you learn to see things through the eyes of someone who's very different and often sees the world in a very different way. So it's more than just communicating, which of course is very, very important, but it's learning to see things from a different perspective, which is so important. Obviously, studying international relations, economics, that's all extremely important. If you have an opportunity, we have wonderful internships at the State Department. You can be in Washington and work in an office in the State Department, or the other program, which is also fantastic, and I recommend both of them. You can be an intern at an embassy abroad. When I was in Papua New Guinea, we had a student come, a graduate student who was majoring in environmental affairs, and he traveled all over Papua New Guinea and did reporting on environmental affairs and what was happening in Papua New Guinea. Those two programs, if you're really thinking about foreign service, you'll really get a chance to see what the life is like. It's a fascinating life. I loved it. But it's not for everyone. Not everybody wants to live most of their life abroad. So those would be the things that I would say.
All right, thank you. So this is a question from YouTube. It says, which location did you enjoy the most such that you'd return to visit?
Well, I was really fortunate. I had wonderful posts. And I've actually been back. I've been fortunate enough to be able to go back to a number of them. I've been back to Brazil. I actually, people hold conferences, and sometimes you get to go to a conference in the country that you served in. I also went back to Portugal. I went back to Kenya. I want to go back to all of my posts. I would say that in terms of, and there are different posts that I loved for different reasons. We love Brazil. Our children were all born in Brazil, and in Recife, Brazil. I served in Sao Paulo first, but in my third post in Recife, when I was principal officer and consul, my husband had a wonderful job. He was the elementary school principal at the international school. I had a great job traveling over 7 different states, and the Brazilians are wonderful people. Our kids love the school. And it's not very often that you get 5 people who really love where they are. So we ended up extending for a year, which is not usual. Usually you're there 2 or 3 years, but we were able to stay a 4th year. That was our best family post. I love being ambassador, of course. That was a great experience, being in Mozambique and Papua New Guinea. But I also, one of my favorite jobs was being the deputy ambassador in Kenya. It was a very big post. We had so many issues we were concerned about. Today is 9/11. Well, terrorism was still a very big problem in Kenya. Our embassy had been bombed 5 years before, and the whole embassy was destroyed. We lost 34 of our employees, 12 Americans and 22 Kenyans. We were covering Somalia, which we didn't have a mission at the time. So we were responsible for Somalia as well as Southern Sudan before they had the peace treaty, and South Sudan became an independent country. So that was one of my favorite jobs in terms of just the work itself, and the HIV/AIDS program, the president's program for AIDS relief. was launched in Kenya during my time. And it was just wonderful to see one of our programs that really saved so many lives. When we first started the PEPFAR program on AIDS relief, there were only about 50,000 people in the entire world that had access to treatment. And today, there are around 14 million people who are on antiretroviral drugs. Those people would be dead today if it weren't for the kinds of programs that we did and some other countries did to save them. So that was a very meaningful post. But to tell you the truth, I love them all. It was a stimulating life, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Thank you. And then we have another question from Lindsay Elhart. She asked, what was your biggest life lesson after your several terms as a U.S. ambassador?
Biggest life lesson? That's kind of a tough one. That the world is a fascinating place, that we share so much with so many different countries. People are people. We all have the same goals for our families and our communities. That we basically have got to help each other in any way we can. And that was what was such a privilege for me, as being a diplomat and an ambassador, to be able to represent the United States, which does amazing work abroad.
And then we have another question from YouTube asking, do you still see a positive role for the Peace Corps?
Absolutely. And that would be another thing that I would recommend to any of you that are interested in foreign service. We have a lot of former Peace Corps volunteers who have become ambassadors. My ambassador in Bangkok, Thailand, had been a Peace Corps volunteer, and the deputy chief of mission, the number 2, had been a Peace Corps volunteer. I loved visiting our volunteers because they were on the ground. They could really tell you what the life was like for people, in rural areas. And they gave so much. The Peace Corps volunteers always say that they get more from the experience than they actually give, but they give a tremendous amount. And it's a fantastic program. And if any of you have an opportunity to do it, I really recommend it.
Thank you, Leslie. Some great advice. So finally, can you tell us what it means for you to be a Coug?
When you go to Washington State University, it never leaves you. I come back periodically. I actually came back for the 50th anniversary of the Honors College. But it was a time for me of, the first time away from home, of being independent, being exposed to so many different ideas, professors, great classes in the Honors College, and an opportunity to explore so many different things. And when I look back at my time at WSU, it was my preparation for life, studying foreign languages, the honors courses, getting a scholarship to study in Paris. It set me up for what was a really satisfying and stimulating life. So it never leaves you. And you can find cougars in all over the world, which I have, and in the state of Florida, where I now live. We have an active alumni program there as well. So I'm very proud to have gone to WSU and to be a cougar.
Thank you, Leslie. So that concludes our presentation. We would like to thank everyone for spending part of their afternoon with us today. If you have any questions or comments for Leslie or anyone in the Honors College, please email us at honors@wsu.edu. We look forward to your continued engagement and very much appreciate your support of our students, faculty, and programs. 60 years of honors education at Washington State University. Here's to 60 more. From all of us at the WSU Honors College, I'm Malea Loukides. Until next time, take care, be well, thank you again, and as always, go Cougs.